Canadian Jewish groups are urging governments to adopt stricter anti-terrorism laws after a pro-Palestine activist attack in Washington, D.C. killed 2 Israeli embassy employees.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's mandate letter pledges to make housing more affordable, but in reality, the Liberals continue to offer only subsidized rentals for those priced out of the market, with no real path to home ownership.
A University of Western Ontario student is suing the institution after alleging they were interrogated for questioning the university's commitment to DEI principles. Hello Canada, it's Friday, May 23rd, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Clayton, DeMaine.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. The killing of 2 Israeli embassy workers in Washington, D.C. by a far-left activist shouting, quote, "Free Palestine," has sparked calls for stricter laws against the glorification of terrorism by Canada's Jewish advocacy groups. A young couple set to be married, Yaron Lichinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram, were shot and killed Wednesday night while working for the Israeli embassy outside of a Jewish museum in the U.S. Capitol. The alleged shooter, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez, shouted, quote, "Free, free Palestine," while being arrested after allegedly taking credit for the incident in the moments preceding the attack. The incident took place at the American Jewish Committee's event, which Canadian Jewish rights groups say was an event focused on extending humanitarian aid into Gaza as Israel continues its war to rid the region of Hamas control. Canadian Jewish advocates are calling the murders a, quote, "wake-up call," and are demanding legislative bodies take direct action to strengthen Canada's laws against the glorification of terrorism. The Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs interim president Noah Shack released a statement condemning the attack and mourning for the families of the victims. Shack wrote, quote, "As we await further details about this horrific crime, reports that the assailant shouted 'Free Palestine' speak to the danger of the intensifying rhetoric targeting our community. What happened in Washington is the result of the predictable pattern of growing hate and incitement targeting Jews in North America." Prime Minister Mark Carney shared his condolences for the Jewish community and pledged to, quote, "act to keep Jewish Canadians safe." Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre similarly posted a message of support for the Jewish community following the attack, asserting Canada needs to do, quote, "everything it can to stop this evil." Canada has a few laws that I'm aware of that deal with this sort of thing, particularly incitement of genocide. But Clayton, could you enlighten us on what current laws are on the books right now in Canada regarding the glorification of terrorism? And have there been any incidents in the recent past where we've seen activists openly praising terrorist groups?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So the question of whether there are laws that prevent the glorification of terrorism is somewhat in dispute, which could indicate that the laws could use some clarification. Some civil rights organizations, such as the Canadian Constitution Foundation, for example, has suggested that the incitement and hate speech laws could be used against those who openly fly things such as terrorist flags. Though the Crown would have to prove that they wielded such a flag with the intent to cite violence or hatred. It's against the law to glorify terrorism in a way that risks incitement, but that is a threshold that would have to be proven. It's also against the law to participate in, contribute to, or facilitate any activity of a terrorist group. With the current rules, perhaps it could be argued that by disseminating propaganda and acting like a cheerleader for terrorists, one is participating in or facilitating their activities in Canada. The CCF, by the way, told True North in one article that regardless of the criminality of these acts, they may be good targets for investigation by Canadian intelligence. True North wrote an article in August of last year about Jewish advocates demanding anti-glorification laws like they are right now. The Center of Israel and Jewish Affairs told True North that the current legislation prohibits anyone from participating in a terrorist group, but falls short of explicitly criminalizing the glorification of terrorism. But if our audience remembers Sammy Doohan, which was eventually found to be a terrorist group, but for years it disseminated terrorist propaganda, and there are other groups like the Palestinian Youth Movement who celebrate that they publish terrorist literature. You also just have to look at the streets, like almost every protest you see that's a anti-Israel protest, you hear things like from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, which is often looked at as a call to eradicate Israel from the map. Long live the resistance is who are the resistance in that region? It's Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. Prime Minister Mark Carney released a mandate letter to cabinet yesterday prioritizing housing affordability just days after Housing Minister Gregor Robertson shut down any talk of lowering the sky-high cost of homes. In reality, the Liberals continue to offer subsidized rentals as a poor substitute for home ownership and are planning to have the government play an even larger role in housing. Robertson, in his first public remarks on May 14th, explicitly shut down the idea of lowering the cost of homes by saying, quote, "No, I think that we need to deliver more supply, make sure the market is stable. It's a huge part of our economy." 5 days later in Rome, Carney dodged the question in a similar non-committal way, suggesting the answer, quote, "depends on the time frame and the specific type of housing." But how can the government both make housing more affordable while maintaining the status of home ownership as a lucrative investment? Their responses don't reflect leaders serious about making home ownership widely accessible, but rather seem more inclined towards protecting existing asset values. High home prices and affordable housing can only coexist through a government-subsidized rental market, which disadvantages home buyers in waiting. This model offers affordable housing in the form of rentals while preserving investment returns for homeowners. A major drop in housing prices could seriously impact the financial system. As Robertson pointed out, the real estate sector constitutes a substantial portion of our economy, up to 20% of Canada's GDP, according to 2023 numbers. Any attempt to lower home prices could potentially unsettle homeowners and the growing number of investors alike, a risk this government appears unwilling to take. Instead, the proposed Liberal solution centers on Minister Robertson's likely first order of business as laid out in Carney's 2025 election platform. A major push for government-run housing projects, including a new Crown corporation called Build Canada Homes, as outlined in Carney's federal election platform. The organization aims to inject $25 billion into prefabricated home builders and provide an additional $10 billion in low-cost financing for affordable housing. These proposed solutions stand in contrast to the deeply ingrained Canadian dream of owning a single-family home, a desire still held by 61% of respondents in a WAHI survey from this year. So, Cosmin, you're the one who wrote this analysis of the housing plan. How does immigration play into this? Has the Carney government offered a credible plan to tackle the demand side of the housing crisis?
So, no, absolutely not. Where they're most lacking is addressing the demand side of things. While there have been some proposed solutions in providing more supply of housing, it generally trends towards prefabricated homes, etc. There's no real plan to develop those single detached homes, the single family housing that most people wanting to buy a home in the next 5 or so years are looking for. But with regard to immigration, you just have to look at the numbers to realize that the math and the current rate of housing starts doesn't really make sense or add up to the immigrants who have already arrived over the last few years under the aggressive immigration targets introduced by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when he was still in office. So going back to 2019, this may have been before the pandemic, but they included some projections. There was a Royal LePage survey that found newcomers represented 21% of all home buyers. And at the current migration levels at the time, which were lower than what they eventually became, they were projected then to purchase 680,000 homes over 5 years. Now, let's assume that's a very conservative estimate because they ramped up immigration quite aggressively after that. But even with that 680,000 estimate of homes purchased by newcomers, if you compare it to the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation data over the past 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, the available data, that shows that only 1.24 million housing starts were achieved over that 4 year period. Yet, with the ongoing immigration activity, that means with these 680,000 homes purchased by newcomers target, that's over 50% of the new housing starts would be going to newcomers if they're purchasing new homes. Now, obviously, they may be purchasing homes that are already on the market, haven't just been built, but it just goes to show how inadequate the housing starts are at meeting the demand side of things. And previous measures introduced both by Trudeau and pledged to carry on by Prime Minister Mark Carney to limit temporary residence, which include things like caps on study permits and stricter work permit rules for temporary foreign workers, have not curbed asylum filings or people overstaying their temporary visa. And when you look at the number of international students, by the way, who, when they come to Canada, require rental housing, they filed a record 20,245 asylum claims just last year. And the trends by quarter continues to go up. I think projections are like over 20% year over year jump for requests for asylum claims from international students. And there's no plan, despite the rhetoric from Carney, to return to some sort of sustainable immigration levels. There's no plan to address this loophole. The fact that you can come to Canada on a temporary visa and then apply for asylum or refugee status, which will keep you here guaranteed for several years with the current backlog. Now, the simple solution to that would be to prevent and bar people here on a temporary visa from filing asylum claims. If they arrived here to work and go to school, that is the sole reason they should be in this country and not to claim asylum after the fact. A University of Western Ontario student is taking the post-secondary school to court after being interrogated for daring to question the school's adherence to DEI ideology. Margaret Munn is a 63-year-old educator from Scotland who spent approximately 30 years teaching English in Japan and 4 years teaching adult learners in the Thames Valley District School Board. She returned to her alma mater, Western University in London, Ontario, to access better job opportunities, but on her return, she encountered the school's newfound commitment to decolonization and other woke principles. Believing freedom of expression was still permitted at the school, she challenged her instructors' dogmatic beliefs, including in an Indigenous education towards a decolonizing pedagogy class. Munn asked what the definition of decolonization was and questioned some of the, quote, highly politicized claims made in the class, such as how the concept could be practically employed in a high school chemistry lab or mathematics exam. The professor allegedly told her that the definition would reveal itself gradually over the semester, but only for students engaged in, quote, self-reflection informed by anti-colonial precepts. Her pushback led to continuous back and forth emails with educators, several disciplinary interrogations with the associate dean and educators, a constant threat that she could be expelled, and barriers to completing the program's required field placement classes. Munn's lawsuit details a series of administrative barriers and harassment she faced for expressing opinions in the classroom, such as that education should remain apolitical, criticism of preventing cultural appropriation via Halloween costumes, and referring to a male student with large prosthetic breasts by the wrong pronoun. The stress caused by the continuous gauntlet of administrative hurdles led Munn to obtain multiple doctor's notes for assignment extensions, Yet, she was still made to undergo alleged struggle sessions and meetings with program administrators. Clayton, this appears to be a prevailing theme through most universities in Canada, especially university programs in the education or humanities fields. Were there any other issues of interest brought up by Munn's lawsuit against Western University?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a 20-page lawsuit, so there was plenty of stuff, and honestly, it's worth the read for anyone who's interested. Um, but yeah, I mean, she details several different instances of her saying just essentially challenging the narratives that are being put forward. She was even made to retake extra courses because they didn't believe that she fully internalized the indigenous course material enough. So they made her take online courses, and allegedly those courses had technical problems. As a recent student, I know what it's like when an online program doesn't work. So that added to some stress when she brought this up to in one of her multiple interrogations and meetings with faculty and administrators. They told her to watch a CBC podcast on Roman Catholic run residential school and said that there's a lot of abuse in it, so it could be triggering, and then asked her if she was Catholic. There's also instances where they allegedly told her that she only questions the narratives of the decolonization class because she's an immigrant and she hasn't internalized the need to achieve reconciliation with indigenous peoples. So something that we didn't get to add in the article, a qualification of the program is to get field placement. She was even allegedly told by one of her professors that they would be a reference for her. And the lawsuit alleges that they gave a poor review of her in the reference. Another professor refused to even give a reference. So she had a very hard time, allegedly, getting into one of these programs in order to graduate. It's honestly a shock that this woman was able to graduate from this program with all these administrative hurdles. She also had to get a doctor's note for multiple times because of the stress that all of this was putting her under. Meanwhile, all the other students are just focusing on their studies. She has to jump through these hurdles in order to even graduate or to not be expelled.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.